Good morning, everyone. On behalf of CINTEL, I would like to welcome you to this webinar, focused on a topic that is becoming increasingly relevant for cybersecurity, digital trust, and long-term resilience. We are talking about post-quantum cryptography, or PQC. For several years, CINTEL has been promoting spaces for discussion and knowledge sharing around quantum computing, cybersecurity, and post-quantum cryptography. In 2023, during the awareness session, we have an awareness session with Valerie Gutierrez from the Universidad de los Andes, and we opened the discussion on potential impact that quantum computers could have on today's cryptography. That conversation opened a very important or key question. What happens to digital trust when the cryptographic foundations we rely on today might no longer be secure in the future? Later in 2024, we talked with IBM and some other organizations, and we analyzed the convergence between artificial intelligence and quantum computing as a driver of innovation in sectors as finance, healthcare, logistics, and other aspects on industry. And it was very relevant because also cybersecurity and post-quantum cryptography come along as a risk in such a scenario. In 2025, the conversation moved closer to the business environment. How should organizations prepare? How can they identify critical assets? And how can they understand the cryptography they are using in this moment? And this is the purpose of today's webinar. We don't want this session to be only a technical conversation about algorithms. Of course, the technical dimension is essential, but our main goal today is to understand what governments, industries, and organizations are already doing to prepare for this transition. In Colombia, we have made progress in digital transformation, cybersecurity, and digital trust. However, the quantum risk and the migration towards post-quantum cryptography are still not in a visible radar for national or for the national public or business agendas. That is why today we want to learn from international experience, particularly from Europe and the United Kingdom, where this discussion has already moved from awareness to roadmaps, pilots, and practical implementations. We are very pleased to be joined by Mira and Thomas from CYSTEL, an organization with experience in cybersecurity, quantum technologies, and preparing organizations for quantum-safe future. With Mira and Thomas, we will explore why quantum computing represents a risk to current cryptography, what Europe and United Kingdom are doing, what governments and industries are already learning, and what solutions are emerging and could be implemented in Colombia. So Mira, Thomas, thank you very much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you in this conversation.
Thank you, Dennis. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, I was just going to say the same. Thank you very much for having us. It's a pleasure to be here.
To begin, I would like to frame the problem in very simple terms. In Colombia, many public-private organizations rely on cryptography infrastructure every day. Digital certificates, secure communications, electronic signatures, and many other critical digital services. However, most of organizations do not necessarily have a clear awareness of their cryptography use. Colombia has public instruments related to digital security, digital trust, and digital transformation. There is also growing discussion around cyber resilience, data protection, and information security. However, the country does not yet have a national roadmap of migration to post-quantum cryptography, not a broad public discussion on around the harvest now and decrypt later risk. So I think it's important to start with the basic problem. Thomas, could you briefly explain why quantum computing represents a risk to the current cryptography? What are the concepts of harvest now, decrypt later, and why organizations should start preparing now rather than waiting for the quantum computers to become fully available?
Yes, I can do that. Thank you for this question. So there are several dimensions attached to this. So one of the first reasons why organizations should look at this now is that everything that happens in the internet has some form of cryptographic transaction attached to it. So for example, if we think about us starting a banking application on a mobile phone, just starting the banking application involves numerous cryptographic transactions. If we're looking at a bank transfer between 8 or 9 parties, international parties, then we're looking at 30,000 only cryptographic transactions. And so these cryptographic transactions, they need to be secure because they pose a risk if or when we get a quantum computer. That's the first thing. So cryptography is everywhere. The second part to think about is there is a gentleman called Peter Shor. He developed an algorithm in 1994, and this algorithm can reverse engineer our current cryptographic setup. So it is very good at reverse engineering the keys we're using to encrypt our data, and hence that with a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, it would make our systems essentially vulnerable. So our public key infrastructure, so the RSA algorithms, the elliptic curve algorithms that are being used today, just increasing the length of the key is no longer suitable to be protected against quantum computers. On the other hand, symmetric encryption is still safe. We can simply upgrade the key length or the bit size of these symmetric encryptions, and then that's difficult for a quantum computer to crack. Another consideration is, well, when will we actually get a quantum computer? So nobody really knows the answer to that one. However, there are estimates, and these estimates, they were done by, for example, the Global Risk Institute, by Gartner, by the RAND Corporation, by the NSA in the USA, and there's also an industrial consensus that by, some say 2030, 2035, we will have a version of a cryptographically relevant quantum computer available. Now, the challenge is, what if it happens earlier, and how long will it take us as organizations globally in Colombia to transition from our existing cryptographic estate to a better place? Now, that poses a risk essentially. Now, which leaves us to this idea of harvest now, decrypt later. So harvest now, decrypt later, Dennis, you mentioned this at the start. It's simply about that organizations, usually state actors, they harvest data, any form of data today, they store it somewhere, and then eventually, once a cryptographically relevant quantum computer is available, they will simply decrypt that data. So it becomes a question of, well, how valuable is that data in 5, 10 years' time still, right? For, let's say, for my credit card information, that's not so problematic. But if we look at different types of let's say, government diplomatic data, that could be really at risk. If we're looking at biometric and identity data, think about passports, maybe also think about health data, genomic records, think about the intellectual property in terms of R&D, especially now, since a lot of organizations, they're pouring money into AI, for example. You're investing millions and millions of pounds into the development of AI for your organization. So what if somebody steals that? And so these are the reasons why we should really start now. I think the more important reason is really that we already have seen regulatory shifts. So we just saw an announcement made 2 days ago by the French regulator saying that by 2027, if you're supplying hardware and software in France, you must have conducted a post-quantum upgrade. Otherwise, it will be difficult, if not impossible, for you to get any business in France. And so if we combine that with the time it takes for organizations to transition, so we're not looking at a 10, 15-minute update. We're looking at 7, 10 years, depending on the size of the organization, to upgrade their cryptography. And hence, the time to start really is now. Yeah, and so that's really what my answer to this question would be.
Thank you, Thomas. So the threat doesn't not depend only when the quantum computer is capable of breaking current cryptography, but the risks already exist for sensitive information that can be captured today and decrypted in the future. But for Colombia, this means we have to start by identifying which information must remain protected for years or even decades, and which systems depends on cryptography that might need to be updated in the coming years. And very important, what you mentioned of France, we export some service, we export some hardware to France, to Europe, and to United States. And post-quantum cryptography is now not a commodity, but a must-have. So if we want to keep that market, we need to comply with the PQC. Let us now move to the international landscape. Colombia has a national digital strategy that seeks to coordinate the country digital transformation initiatives. We also have some policy documents and guidelines related to digital security, digital trust, and capability building. These instruments are important because they have helped advance our national vision regarding the secure use of digital technologies. However, when we compare Colombia with Europe or US, in Europe, post-quantum cryptography is already being treated as a public policy transition, not just as technical issue. So, Thomas, what is happening in Europe regarding post-quantum cryptography? Could you share the main developments, guidelines, discussions, and lessons that could be useful for a country like Colombia, please?
Yes, thank you for this, Dennis. Yeah, so we have in Europe several strands that have emerged, but maybe prior to talking about Europe, it may be good to inject here another development that happened. So if we look, for example, at the Middle East, in particular the UAE, they have already given a mandate to their ministries to be post-quantum ready from the perspective of having conducted a cryptographic discovery exercise by the end of 2026, right? Now, so they have overtaken us from that perspective, essentially. And now when we're looking more closely at Europe, then we have certain bodies that have given us some guidelines. So, for example, the European Commission, their recommendation was essentially to develop a coordinated roadmap, right? So there's an encouragement for member states to develop a comprehensive post-quantum adoption strategy, essentially, which means we need a synchronized transition across the entire continent of Europe. It includes national security agencies. There are security experts that are involved. There is ENISA as a body involved. There were recommendations from Europol, but also NATO. They were involved in kind of helping to shape that agenda. The legislation may propose binding legislation if progress is insufficient. And so we have seen this happening now, because in the UAE, right? Initially, there was an announcement made, yes, please do something. Organizations were very slow to kind of jump on that bandwagon. And we can see possibly a similar trend in Europe. And so the idea is that by 2026, all member states have some form of national strategy in place at the country level, possibly cryptographic inventories. By 2030, the critical infrastructure in terms of water, energy, healthcare, finance, and transport, they should have very strong migration plans in place. And then by 2035, all migration should have been completed for every risk level. Now, The other thing to look at, so that's at the European level, we can also look at what ENISA shared with us. And ENISA has worked on PQC for several years. They've delivered different types of report in terms of migration techniques. And there's also a level of awareness that is being created through this. Similarly, the BSI, so the Bundessicherheitsanstalt, so the Federal Institute of Security in Germany, they also initiated a technical statement that, well, we need to start looking at this now. That seems to be very important. New crypto products must be built with crypto agility, meaning that we need to be able to swap cryptographic algorithms in whichever form that may look like. And that, for example, QKD may not be alone a sufficient solution in this space. And so these are some of the developments that are happening in Europe.
Thank you. So that shows us that the transition, it requires coordination. We have to coordinate different agencies with different ministries and with different actors in these ecosystems in Colombia. And that it is not enough for each organization to act separately. We need guidelines, sector prioritization, governance, technical capabilities, and long-term vision. Interesting. Now I would like to focus specifically in the United Kingdom, where you are based, and where I know that you have been working with the government and so we like to know, Mira, what is happening specifically in United Kingdom? How is the transition to PQC being addressed by the government, critical sectors, and the entities responsible for cybersecurity in the country?
Thank you, Dennis. So the UK has been quite proactive. I must say that it's quite heartening to see the initiatives that have come in, even a few years ago. So we have two bodies. One is the NCSC, which is the National Cybersecurity Center, and there's one more that was created. I think it was about, again, 2 years ago. It's called the NQCC, the National Quantum Computing Center. So the NQCC is more responsible looking at broader applications of quantum. They have quantum computers there as well that you can access, and they're happy to work with organizations looking at solving specific problems. Now, the NCSC is more focused on the cybersecurity aspect of quantum computing, which is quantum security, quantum safety. So from that perspective, what they did was to issue a directive asking organizations to get ready. So they published a very clear roadmap for all UK-based companies to adhere to. And this roadmap essentially says that by 2028, organizations must have completed the cryptographic discovery phase, so that where is your cryptography, where does it lie, what does it look like, right? And then by 2031, the idea is that high priority migrations and upgrades have happened. And then by 2035, the full migration has taken place. Now, if you look at the timeline, you'll say, 2028, I've got plenty of time to do my inventory. 2035, okay, I've got plenty of time. No, you don't. Because we have been carrying out cryptographic inventory projects, and it is so complicated. Because when you don't know what you have, for us to come in and to first figure out what you have and where it may be, and then to use tools to kind of discover all of that takes an incredible amount of time and resource. So what the NCC is saying is, look, just because these are the preferred dates, that doesn't mean that you start your journey in 2035. It's too late by then, because we could actually get a quantum computer, a commercially viable quantum computer any day. We just don't know yet, and nobody can actually predict that, right? And the day we get that, it's too late. So we need to do something now. And there's a really important point here, Dennis, for the Colombian government and for the people as well, that this is it can be quite an expensive exercise, right? So it's about finding the talent, it's finding the organizations who will carry out the work. And the longer this is left, the more expensive it will become over time, which is why a lot of countries are starting now. You asked another question as a part of that is how are the other organizations, sort of responding to this? In the UK, the financial sector have been, leapfrogging this. There've been so many advancements happening. You've got organizations like HSBC who really started the journey a long time ago and are now leaders in the space. They are pioneers in crypto agility because they're not just concerned about the volume of data, like harvest now, decrypt later, but they're also concerned about the digital identity and the authentication frameworks that are also impacted. So they've made a lot of inroads in the space, and I've also been testing out quantum communication, etc. You've got organizations, telecom sector companies like Vodafone, who have partnered with other organizations to really carry out cryptographic inventory and create those milestones for them. Then because for the telecom sector as well, this isn't an easy problem to solve. And they have identified that and have started the journey now. And if you take British Telecom, again, very advanced, they've been looking at quantum communication. We were on a project with them. We worked with them on a national level project. And where we were looking at cyber toolkits for implementing quantum communication. So all in all, there's quite a bit of advancement in the space and things that are moving fairly rapidly. Thank you.
Okay, so the United Kingdom case can help Colombia to understand that this PQC migration should be treated as multi-year effort, technical transformation program, not just a one-time software update. And there is a key message for decision makers. Preparation must begin before the technical migration become urgent or very immediate. For the Colombian government, it will be very important to understand how other governments have started, whether through diagnosis, sectoral consultations, cryptographic inventories, technical pilots, or other kind of activities with critical sectors. I would like to understand how organizations such as CYSTEL have contributed to this process, particularly in helping governments or public sector stakeholders moving from awareness to practical actions. So, Mira, what efforts can you share at the government level in Europe or United Kingdom or other countries that you know regarding post-quantum cryptography? Are there some pilots experience that you can share with us?
Sure, Janice. So we were part of a pilot as well. We were part of one of the first, I think, countries looking at assurance of quantum because that's a piece that we haven't yet discussed, right? Because you can implement all of that. Where are the assurance standards? How do you create standards to see that what's been implemented actually works? That all of that all the funds that are allocated towards this are actually resulting in something meaningful. So we were part of the assurance standard setting process as well. So again, the UK has been quite good with this. They've been quite advanced. Apart from these pilots, there's also been another pilot to look at creating a consortium of companies who can support organizations with the PQC migration. And so this is really critical because it is to do with creating a supply chain effectively, that you're creating a supply chain of companies that feed into each other, that support each other, but also can support organizations to make that transition. Because at one point it will impact Colombia, right? Because if France is now saying, we will not, all suppliers of software, hardware, if you are not PQC ready, we cannot accept you. UAE has already said that. And as the other countries start to do this, very soon Colombian companies will be in a situation where they will have to respond to that. And the government entities as well. So creating the pool of talent, creating a pool of companies that really are in that space and that can support each other is vital. So UK has been doing that quite well. France has taken, like what we saw 2 days ago, fairly aggressive stance. The National Cybersecurity Agency, NCA and SSI has taken a stance to actually come up with this. And this is a really fairly big announcement to say that they will block security products. They're not just saying that we will consider, they're saying we'll actually block it unless you have included quantum resistant encryption. So this is a very, very big move from a country. So clearly they have seen that this can cause problems going forward. So they want to make sure that right now that we are starting to protect ourselves in this. The EU as a whole, I'll probably go back to what Thomas said, the EU as a whole has a mandate that countries work together and that the cryptographic inventory and the security around quantum is fed into the NIS2 directive of the EU. And these changes, although right now it's advisory, they will start becoming mandatory very soon. So pilots are being carried out. We know the French companies are really active. There are lots of companies doing different bits around quantum. The EU as a whole finds this to be a really critical problem to solve, and the UK as well is on the journey.
And something similar happened in the context of DORA, if I may add this. So the Digital Operational Resilience Act is also one of those legislative pieces or regulatory pieces that speaks about cryptography, post-quantum cryptography, similarly to PCI DSS, although PCI DSS is international, but all European organizations, they had to adhere to this, right? Regardless of the industry, they had to do something because PCI DSS mentions quite explicitly post-quantum cryptography.
The important point is that the governments do not need to have all the answers at the beginning, but they need to start organizing the process and be very active in this coordination. Let us now move from government to industry. You have already been talking about some industry experience. From a business perspective, Colombia has several sectors where this topic should start being discussed as a priority. Mira have already talked about the financial, telecommunications, healthcare, energy and critical infrastructure, government. However, in many of those sectors here in Colombia, the discussion around PQC is still in an early stage or is not there really. Organizations usually discuss cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, but they are not asking themselves how prepared is my cryptographic infrastructure for a post-quantum scenario, or how agile is my cryptography. So from Thomas, from an industry perspective, what cases or experience can you share regarding the migration to post-quantum cryptography?
Yeah, so one of the experiences I can share is let's start broadly. So let's look at the financial sector, for example. So we've been working with HSBC on a government project, and even before we started working with them on this project, they had already started their post-quantum migration journey. So they're well ahead of the game. They've done the cryptographic inventory. They are now investing into, let's do a trial with quantum key distribution. Let's look at quantum random number generators. So they invest in the security side of things, but then also in the revenue generation side of things from a quantum perspective. Something similar is observable if we're looking at Citibank. Citibank is also, this is public knowledge. They're already very advanced when it comes to their cryptographic posture management and also transitioning towards post-quantum. And so they're, in most cases, it's the financial sector that is driving that. They're very advanced. An important thing to see here is, and that boils down to what you and Mira said earlier, that it all boils down to collaboration. So various organizations, whether it's Santander, whether it's HSBC, they participate in all sorts of post-quantum cryptography forums. They have thought leaders developed in the organization who are contributing to these forums, but then they can bring in other talent to kind of ask the difficult questions, because nobody has all the answers, right, at the moment, because we're trying to solve a really difficult problem here. And so the idea of collaborating across sectors is very important. Another thing we realized, and that cuts across sectors, for example, about 3 years ago, we spoke to a fast-moving consumer goods organization, and at that point in time, they simply told us, we're not ready for this stuff yet. And then now in 2026, we spoke to them again, and now they are part of these networks. They have set up a post-quantum steering group within their organization. They had banks although it's fast-moving consumer goods, but they have had banks help them in the consulting exercise to learn from, what experiences did you go through? And so that is something that organizations do. Then there was also an advisory forum set up by Europol, so the Europol Quantum Safe Financial Forum that includes different types of banks who are kind of, sharing information about, what needs to happen from a post-quantum perspective, best practices. There's also a coordinated effort happening. And the idea is that of this forum is that without a common approach, it's very difficult to address the complexity of this whole situation. Something similar happened in the telecom sector. So if we look at the GSMA, the Post-Quantum Telco Network Task Force, they have been publishing papers in that space right from the start of when post-quantum became some form of a thing, advising organizations from a risk perspective. They developed use cases, global use cases. They reported on global use cases in the telecom sector, best practices, what can be done, what works, what doesn't work. But then also these organizations, they form part of this global, the global pockets of where organizations talk about post-quantum cryptography. And so that's very important to get involved in this. Specifically, let's say when we presented or we were part of an event where, for example, HSBC presented something with British Telecom. And so these guys, they are collaborating on 10, 15, 20 projects in that space, whether that's on a paid basis or whether that's on an unpaid basis. And that kind of tells you this is very, very important to these guys. And so that happens, not just across telecom, but anywhere. And then finally, from an industry perspective, we also see maybe not just European use cases, but also international use cases. So, for example, we know that Cloudflare, they have started to make their connections PQC secured in early 2024 with very high adoption rates. Then there's this organization called Signal, similar to WhatsApp. They have already implemented post-quantum cryptography. And then we've, of course, heard of Amazon, AWS, and Apple. They have already started their PQC journey. And then, of course, the latest announcement was with Google, where they're saying by 2029 we would have wanted to complete this. And so these are important indicators. Now, the common thread is that it's a risk-based analysis that happens first. So where are my risks from a data perspective, from an IT systems perspective? Then where is my cryptography that protects the data, that protects the systems? Then there needs to be some prioritization happening because you couldn't do it all in one go. It needs to be a wave-based planning approach of how to transition from some form of cryptographic state of affairs to a better cryptographic state of affairs. And then, of course, then the remediation and the execution happens. And then, of course, the ongoing cryptographic renewal happens because as we've seen from the NIST process, that some of these algorithms, they will become outdated. And that's also quite a normal thing to happen. And so developing the cryptographic inventory, checking for interoperability of systems and the supply chain, of course, and then transitioning towards crypto agility. These are really the cornerstones of what organizations are trying to do in the European context from an industry perspective.
Companies that doesn't work alone. And when you talk about the financial sector, telecommunication sector, maybe some of our viewers are thinking about big companies and that is problem of big companies, but you also talk about supply chain. So we say that the chain is as strong as his weakest link, no? So I don't know, I'm thinking organizations like companies are already as France or US asking their suppliers for PQC readiness?
So it's an important thing to see. So, for example, in the UAE, there was an announcement made by their National Cybersecurity Council. The chief spoke at a particular conference. I think it was in Portugal, and the announcement was that, well, if you're not getting post-quantum ready, it may be very difficult for you to do business in our country. And so if you're operating at this level, then yeah, your supply chain is one of the main things to be looking at. And it is also in the interest of organizations, whether these are federal institutions or whether these are companies, to speak to their suppliers, because let's say you're going through a procurement cycle today, then today there may not be an issue with post-quantum, but then in 3 years' time, legislation may have changed more, let's say, strongly in that regard. And then you have to buy the same software, the same hardware again. And so you're wasting money. So ideally, and we've seen this with the fast-moving consumer goods example company I mentioned earlier, one of the first things they have done is they send their suppliers a questionnaire. Where are you in relation to your post-quantum journey? What are you doing in terms of software, hardware? Share your roadmap. If you don't have a roadmap, okay, let's sit together and then work something out in that space. And so these conversations, they're happening. Yeah.
Okay, so PQC cannot be seen only as a cybersecurity department issue. It involves technology, legal, compliance, procurement, risk management, business continuity, and most of all, senior leadership. So I think for CEOs, CISOs, this is very important. You have a lead in your companies. Well, when we talk about PQC, there might be a perception that is a simple matter of replacing one algorithm with another. But the transition is more complex, as Thomas already said. It involves understanding where cryptography is used, how certificates are managed, which suppliers are involved, what legacy systems exist, and whether the organization has the capacity to change cryptographic components without disrupting their operations. For Colombia, this point is critical because many organizations might not have complete visibility of their cryptographic infrastructure. Even in mature organizations, cryptography can be distributed across applications, network, device, or even suppliers. And so before building a solution, organizations need to understand the problem, identify their exposure, and build the capacity to migrate. So Thomas, what type of solutions are emerging to address the potential challenges that might arise as a result of quantum computing?
So we've talked about the problems, why we should do it, and so now the solutions. And this is a very important thing. So we've started developing the solutions. So one of the solutions is, of course, called post-quantum algorithms. And so NIST, they went through a competition, a 10-year competition. And then in 2024, they announced the algorithms that are the outcome of this very rigorous process of testing. And the best and the brightest, or the IBMs and so forth, they have taken part in this competition to develop these new algorithms. Now, the new solutions, they're embedded in FIPS 203, which is about lattice-based key encapsulation mechanisms. Then they're also based in FIPS 204, which is also module lattice-based, but that's more for digital signatures. And then we have FIPS 205, which is a stateless digital hash-based signature algorithm. And so these exist today. So using post-quantum algorithms, which are not quantum algorithms, which are based on different, stronger, harder to crack mathematical problems, these exist. Now, there was also a new code-based key encapsulation mechanism offered by NIST that happened in March 2025, the HQC, the Hamming quasi-cyclic code-based chem mechanism. And then there will be in the future another digital signature. I think, no, a lattice-based digital signature will be coming, which is then represented in FIPS 206. And so this is the first batch of solutions we have. The second batch of solutions is the idea of crypto agility. So if we think back historically, right, then we have always, as a world, we have always pursued cryptographic agility, right? Even in 1974, we had some old algorithms, some old standards, some old protocols, they were upgraded. However, it took us a very long time to upgrade from a crypto agility perspective, and the cycles were a lot longer. So we're looking at 10, 15, 20-year cycles of having to upgrade from one cryptographic stack to the next cryptographic stack. Now, whenever these upgrades happened, then not all organizations jumped on the bandwagon, and the efforts were kind of faded out a little bit. And so we've done this over decades, essentially. And now the idea is, from a crypto agility perspective, that these cryptographic life cycles, they become shorter. So we're no longer looking at 10-year, 20-year long cryptographic life cycles, but essentially we're looking at 5 or 4 to 5 year long cryptographic life cycles. And these, also because of cryptography, can be broken. And so we need to embed this cryptographic agility in the start of any cryptographic transition project. And we need to be able to do that. And so that's a complex exercise. Now, the transition then, right? So the third element in terms of emerging technologies, and various organizations, they suggest that we shouldn't be doing a pure transition, but in most cases, it could be that there is a hybrid transition. So we'll be relying on our existing cryptography, and then we'll be upgrading with new post-quantum ready cryptography in the same areas. So we have, if you want, a backup solution, just in case post-quantum gets hacked, then we have another backup solution, and then we have a layered approach to this. So hybrid deployments seem to be one of the ways forward. Yeah, and so these are some of the tools that are available for us to pursue.
Thank you. This shows that PQC should not have been seen as a technology purchase. It is an organization capability, knowing where your cryptography is, being able to change it, and govern it, and being agile, as Thomas said. The idea of crypto agility is very important for Colombia, because many organizations will need to modernize not only their algorithms, but the way they manage cryptography risk. Now we talk about solutions, and maybe the people is thinking that the threat is some years from now. So I would like to talk about these threat actors and how they are positioning themselves today. So I would like to discuss the threat perspective. So Mira, how are the threat actors already positioning themselves to exploit future quantum-related vulnerabilities?
I love this question, Dennis, because, I've spent a lot of my life tracking hacker groups and looking at what they do. And it's very interesting what's happening, because if you look at threat actors, we keep reading in the news about threat actors are now breaching and collecting data, right? And we're all thinking, yeah, so what? They're just collecting data. They're not doing any harm. They have not accessed and taken money out. They're just collecting data. But what we don't, what most of us are not thinking about is, why are they collecting all of this data? So there are lots of groups what they're doing is waiting for the right time to be able to access commercial quantum computers, to be able to break the encryption and all the encrypted data that they have collected. There are a couple of groups that we've been tracking online who are quite savvy. They are building tools, technologies. They've started hiring people. These are hacker groups. They know that they will also need encryption specialists. They will need cryptographers. They're trying to get skills when it comes to physics. They want to know, how do we exploit this? Now, keeping in mind, we may think that there is access to quantum computers today, right? So IBM has already given access to universities in the UK to access their IBM quantum computer. It's just very expensive. It's about, how much is it, Thomas? Like $1 a minute or something like that. It's really expensive. The same is where there is a company called D-Wave. They offer access to what could be regarded as a quantum computer, where you can do, where you can start solving certain problems. Because the field of quantum itself, there's quantum annealing, there's quantum sensing, so there are lots of different little areas where a lot of solutions are being deployed. So they are tracking movements of these organizations. They're waiting to see when will it get cheaper to access a cloud-based quantum computer. They don't even have to wait for a commercial quantum computer to be viable. It's just getting that cloud access. So we are watching these groups with interest because they are talking in the underground chat rooms. They have started developing capabilities. It's just a matter of time. So a couple of examples that I would like to give here as to how that may happen is, if you recall, there was in 2024 an attack by an organization called Salt Typhoon. Now, Salt Typhoon is what is regarded as nation-state-sponsored hacker group. And they managed to infiltrate in some of the biggest telecom companies in the US. That was Verizon and AT&T. So what do they do when they got in? They were able to access a lot of the data. They managed to breach and compromise the broadband networks and the routers, and got access to the metadata of the and the communications of millions of users, and including high-profile government officials. Now the question is, what can they do with this? They're just waiting. So now that they've got all this encrypted traffic, all this information with them, it's just a matter of time. They will just wait patiently until they get access to a quantum computer that is cloud-based, and then they can start doing real damage with it. Now, if you take Colombia as an example and threat actors, it's really interesting here because Colombia has seen such an increase in cyber attacks over the years. Over the last 3 years, it's grown by 70%. So a 70% increase over 2 or 3 years is quite phenomenal, actually. And there have been some recent attacks that we should take notice of. So there was an attack on the IFS network. I think this happened in September, in 2023, September. The breach of the IFS network impacted so many Colombian entities. More than 760 entities were impacted. And it also had an impact on the Ministry of Health. It has an impact on the Ministry of Justice. I think around 2 million cases had to be put aside, legal procedures. 2 million legal procedures were postponed because of this. Now, these organizations are not just compromising for today, they're also compromising for tomorrow. They're very interested in collecting a lot of information from cloud providers, from organizations like IFX, where they can store the data and start using it when the timing is right. I want to just take one last example. I don't know if you've heard of an organization called Blind Eagle. Blind Eagle is again a threat actor that specifically focuses on South American countries, and they have been carrying out a number of attacks in South America in the last 2 years. Now, they've been able to launch very successful campaigns. They've targeted Colombian government quite a lot, the judicial systems as well, and they've managed to compromise more than 1,000. I think 1,500 systems or so. Again, these are threat actors we should take very seriously because they are not just collecting data for today. They're not able to access all the financial information that they're likely to have. And when the chance comes, they will be able to access it and start causing serious damage. So that's where we are on the threat actor front.
Thank you. Very interesting
Thanks.
and very scary. It is not only about protecting against today attacks, but also about protecting information that will remain valuable in the future.
Exactly.
So let us now talk specifically about you guys, about CYSTEL. We understand that CYSTEL has developed different solutions to address this need. Could you tell us more about your capability solutions and how you support the organization moving toward a quantum safe environment?
Sure, I'll kick this off and pass over to Thomas. We got on this journey early enough where a lot of people were still asking the question, what is quantum? We developed our own risk frameworks around this. We were noticed by British Telecom, who were looking for organizations who are very innovative, very resourceful in developing, because it is a new field in a way. And then we worked with them for about 18 months on quantum assurance. We did a lot of consulting work in the space with a number of other organizations, with the banking sector, with maritime sector, with manufacturing industry as well. We developed our own tool, and I'll hand over to Thomas to talk a bit more about some of the stuff we do.
Yeah, so one of the things we need to recognize, and that's where we help organizations with this, that this is not just a technical exercise. This is an organizational exercise. This is a governance exercise. This is also a trust exercise. So do we trust our existing systems, the ones we have, our own systems? Do we trust our supplier systems? And so we help organizations in creating that awareness across different levels of organizations, whether that's at the technical level, whether it's at the middle management level, or whether that's at the senior level. So we can help in writing, for example, policies for government, right? Because we've been working in the space, we've been working with different ministries in different regions who have asked us about our opinion, what would we do? We've worked through these items, and we can help certainly in that space. So that's at the government level, or at the macro level. At the more micro level, we can of course help organizations, any form of organization, because we've done this exercise with a well-known fast-moving consumer goods company in the drink sector. We've done this with a bank. We are now moving towards critical national infrastructure. So we have, I think, a very interesting footprint of organizations we have worked with. And because of the variation in the technology, we find no organization is the same. So it's a stretching exercise. So our normal approach would be to deploy our tool. We have developed our own solution, which is a SaaS-based solution that can scan your external threat environment for cryptographic objects. So that's very different from your regular vulnerability scanner, because we are interested in cryptographic objects that we're scanning for. And then we can deploy different agents, non-agents, tabs, protocols into your internal environment. We can connect to APIs, to the different systems you're operating, and then we can ingest, essentially like a Hoover, we can ingest all the different types of cryptographic objects an organization is using, and then we can, whether that's the keys, whether that's the protocols, whether that's the cipher suite, whether that's the key length, whether that's the algorithms, whether that's hash values, it doesn't really matter. We can cater for everything in that space. And then we can risk score that, right? So we can look at your network infrastructure, we can look at your databases, and we can look at your cloud, we can look at your code base, and all of that is then absorbed, and then we risk score it. And then we provide organizations with a list of priorities in terms of what we think could be transitioned first, second, and third, so that they are not opening the budget floodgates, but that there's a streamlined approach in terms of, yes, we have an orderly transition from, okay, this is our current cryptographic estate to an improved cryptographic estate. Now we work because clients know their environments usually better than we do. It's also about then identifying, well, for the client organization, what are the crown jewels? What are the most important systems? Where do they have known vulnerabilities in relation to the crown jewels and their IT infrastructure? And so we feed that valuable knowledge then into the prioritization of what needs to happen. And so the outcome of this process is that we get a very well-balanced roadmap in terms of what organizations can present, either to the regulator, because they're, from what we've seen, regulators seem to have very specific requirements in terms of how to present cryptographic inventories, cryptographic bill of materials, depending on the region, but then also internally. It's a feasible, it's a document that is feasible for the organization to implement. And so that's really what we help organizations with. Now, once we have the roadmap in place, once we've identified what needs to be transitioned first, second, third, then we would be drawing on our ecosystem. We're embedded in the post-quantum ecosystem, and bring in partners who can sell possibly quantum-related HSMs who have implemented post-quantum cryptography. And so that would be a hybrid exercise between us and the partners we'd be working with. And so that's essentially what we do. Mira, do you have anything else you wanna say in this space?
No, I just wondered if Dennis wanted to see a demo of the tool, or we leave it for another day. Happy to,
So if it is suitable for you, we can do it now and see if we can
Sure.
edit it.
Yeah.
and-
I can share. I have a few slides here. I can share my screen if that's okay.
That's okay.
So here we see the solution we're operating, right? And so this assumes that we have done a scan of an organization. So that could be an external scan or an internal scan. And then we see certain results. So this would be the first overview we would share, right? So we've done the exercise, and then you would see, okay, a vulnerability dashboard, a PQC vulnerability dashboard, where we would indicate, well, these are the number of critical systems we found, the number of systems that have a high problem exposure, a medium problem exposure, and a low problem exposure. And then we would list the top findings in terms of AI. So this, not just in terms of AI, but in terms of general cryptography. So this is quite important, because what we realized is, let's say you find cryptographic shortcomings in your network. Nowadays, it's very simple to put this into Claude, into any open AI, and you can write exploits yourself, right? And so we've listed where this is really possible. We also then show you the business risk exposure, so whether they're mission critical systems that are being exposed, so that needs to be looked at very urgently, whether they're business critical systems or whether we're looking at standard systems or low impact systems, right? And so that's a general overview. Then once we're looking at the PQC findings, then you would see, for example, for the cloud, so this is a cloud dashboard, which cloud servers these we scanned, which protocols were used, whether it's TLS 1.3, 1.2, whatever it is, then the Cipher suite, and to what extent they're ready. So in this case, the organization wasn't really so ready for post-quantum, which is not a surprise, because many medium-sized organizations are not yet ready. And then we show, well, the risks, of course, but then also where specifically the issues were. That, of course, is then translated into a cryptographic bill of materials, where you would normally see here the IP addresses, the host names, and then the different versions of the protocols and the Cipher suite, and then again the issues that we were able to identify. So these are the PQC findings from a network level, and then we could do the same thing from a code-based perspective. Now, eventually, all of this is translated into a cryptographic bill of materials. So this is required by the regulator. It may also be required by your customers. So your customers want to see, well, let's see your cryptographic bill of materials. How are you doing in terms of the good, the bad, and the ugly? And so here we provide asset identifiers, so you can really drill down to where the problem is. You can identify the type, whether it's a portal, whether it's an API gateway. It could really be anything. And then again, the findings, whether there's a business criticality associated with that, whether that's a tier 1 criticality or a tier 3 criticality, and there's a risk score associated with that as well. Then, of course, we have compliance, right? So for us, compliance is very important. We cover a number of compliance standards in the compliance frameworks. And here, of course, we have NIST covered, we have NCSE, but then, of course, because of our location, we have European regulatory frameworks covered, and then as you can imagine, PCI DSS, ISO, there's something happening, and then FedRAMP, CMMC is important for organizations working in the military space, and then of course GDPR. And so that's a high-level overview of that, and then we can drill down into these different standards. So here again, we have an NSA standard. We provide the level of exposure, the same for NIST. For the different FIPS standards that were mentioned, and then also PCI DSS. right? And here then we provide more details in relation to that. So top violations across different frameworks, and that will really give you a very quick overview of what to do, but it will also give you actions to take. Now, and then of course, question is, well, what do you do if you have all these results? We need to help organizations to start with a migration. And so we have a migration planner embedded in the system, which will then tell you, well, in phase 1, 2, and 3, these are the items you could do. It would cost you that much money. It would take you these many tasks to complete, and it would take you so long to do it. Yeah. And then, of course, you don't want to do this during your busy office hours. You want to scan activities when everybody is maybe not using the systems, and so you can set up the system at whichever schedule that is suitable for your organization, really. And finally, we have also our AI helper. So let's say you're not very familiar with the different terms you find as part of the results, then you can simply put them here into the AI helper, and it will give you answers to the questions you may have. Right, and so that's a quick overview of the solution we offer. And on top of that, we then offer consulting services to help organizations understand these requirements and then how to actually perform the migration.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Very good.
We look forward to, we would love to do something in Colombia if something comes up. By the way, Dennis, we're just starting work in Mexico on quantum. So it's happening. Yeah. One of our first contracts. So that market is, I think, starting to move. So it would be, so I think, Colombia should definitely take a lead on this.
With a private company?
Private, yes, it is with the company that works in the maritime sector. They've been hacked a few times, so they are very keen on taking this forward, because for them, I think one thing we didn't talk about in this chat, and we should have, is the whole AI argument. Companies who say, oh, we're focusing on AI, we cannot think about quantum. I'm sorry, but if you're building agentic AI on top of stack, that is not secure. That agentic AI can go rogue and can do a lot of damage. So companies who are hacked really understand this, and they want to sort of make sure that that stack is very secure. So I have a feeling this will, if Mexico is looking into this, I think Colombia will as well. I have a feeling. So hopefully we'll be able to do something in the space.
To close, I would like to bring the conversation directly to the Colombian context. We are still in an early stage, but that also means that we can learn from countries that have already started, and we can avoid some mistakes, prioritize better, and build a gradual roadmap. So it will also be important for private sector not to wait for regulation before taking action. Companies can start with basic question: what data must be protected for more than 10 years? Where do we use cryptography? Which suppliers are critical? What contracts should include crypto agility requirements? And which internal areas should participate in the preparation process? So finally, Mira and Thomas, what recommendations would you give Colombia to start these migrations, both from government perspective and from a perspective of private sector organizations?
Sure. Thanks for that, Dennis. So, I want to be positive about this. I think Colombia has made a lot of positive strides in recent years. So you have, I think it was in 2025, you've set up the first National Security Operations Center with the Ministry of ICT, which is great. And you also have the National Digital Security Strategy between 2025 and 2027. So I think there's a lot of positive things happening in Colombia when it comes to security. And this, my first recommendation would be to have a clear transition plan for the country. And this is what I would request the government to do is, you've seen the other countries do it. What is needed is a national PQC transition plan and a strategy that goes along with this to say, how, and this can be tied in with the national digital security strategy as well. It can pretty much follow what other European countries have done so far, but having this plan will ensure that there is a certain way in which all the organizations, including government entities, can move forward. My second suggestion would be that they do something similar, that they use their procurement powers, do something similar to France, where if you are a company supplying to Colombian government and Colombian federal agencies, then you must have had your encryption checked. And you must have demonstrated that you have had it checked, you're going through the process or building in that agility. And this really comes down to sovereignty problem, that you want to make sure that there aren't those kind of data leaks that can impact Colombia later on. From a private sector perspective, it would be that companies should be very careful and start developing their migration plan today. And I say this only because we've seen how much it costs companies to do it. The longer they wait, the more expensive it gets, and the more you will pay to get the right people in and use the right skills. So, my strongest suggestion for corporate organizations would be to start planning today, to start executing your cryptographic inventories today. Thanks.
Yeah, I can contribute to this, I think, adding on what Mira said. So for me, there are two strands if I were in charge of anything in Colombia. So there is a government strand, and from a government perspective, as Mira mentioned, you already have your national cybersecurity strategy. So how would PQC be added into this national cybersecurity strategy? So this is not an additional piece of work. You already have a cybersecurity strategy, and post-quantum would simply be another cornerstone of that. The other thing to do could be to set up a lead authority in the space. So that could be initially a lead authority that kind of tries to coalesce the talent, the pockets of post-quantum innovation you already have somewhere in Colombia, or maybe countries around Colombia who you're collaborating with. And this lead authority could organize joint events, maybe similar to this webinar, or maybe in a conference style setup. And also Colombia could join, for example, the PKI consortium, so the post-quantum interest group consortium, who are meeting annually or semi-annually in different parts of the globe. And that input these guys provide, that could also feature as part of your strategy and help the local authority develop further. And then, of course, and that we see in other governments happening, that the various different strands in government, they are already pursuing their cryptographic inventory exercise. So before the governments impose or suggest to public or to private organizations to perform their cryptographic inventory exercise, they go through this themselves. And then, of course, there is a mandate to kind of secure the critical national infrastructure. So whatever is dear to Colombia in terms of its critical national infrastructure, that needs to form part of this initial transition. So that's for the government side of things. For the private sector, it's very clear what needs to happen. Organizations also should, if they don't know, should maybe form part or could form part of these different types of consortiums, but they should start the discovery and the assessment process today. That's very important. And then identify what's the good, the bad, and the ugly of our cryptographic posture. Then also vendor engagement, what we mentioned, all of us mentioned this before. So the supply chain, right? How are my suppliers doing when it comes to this? Is there a new procurement cycle happening? If so, are my suppliers from whom I'm procuring things, are they secure or not? And then also, as part of that, investigate the idea of a hybrid deployment, right? Do we have legacy systems which cannot be replaced? We do not want to replace them. Is there a way around this, right? And also, can we replace certain systems? Do we need to replace certain systems? And so that kind of thought exercise. And then finally, this is, I think, a very important point, is the development of skills, right? Because there is already a skill shortage in this area. And so it's important to build the skills. And for me, a very nice example of how this has happened in the world is if you look at the city of Chicago. So Chicago, they have set up a quantum park at the northern end, at the lake. And so this is a proper quantum ecosystem with anything to do with quantum. And just to engage maybe with these quantum parks around the globe. There are others, but Chicago is one of them, and see what they have done, and then emulate a version of that for Colombia in terms of skills development. And they know in the next 10 years, I think they have to develop 30,000 people working in quantum, right? Not just quantum cryptography, but different areas. And so it's a massive task, but I think that these guys have taken the right steps. And so skills development, whether that's at a government level or whether that's at an individual organization level, is very important.
Mira, Thomas, thank you very much for joining us and for sharing this perspective from Europe, United Kingdom, and CYSTEL. From CINTEL, we will continue promoting spaces for awareness, coordination, and preparation around post-quantum digital trust, with the purpose of helping Colombia move toward a more secure, resilient, and future-ready digital infrastructure. Mira, Thomas, thank you
so
again
much for
for
having
your
us.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you all participants for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.